There's a conference that takes place every year in either in Arizona, Tucson, or somewhere else about consciousness. It's probably the biggest consciousness conference around, actually. It started off in Arizona, but as I say, it goes on the road now, different cities. And I've been invited to it about 3 times actually in the years it's been running, but I've never been able to go. It's either been at a bad time of the year, or else I haven't been able to get funding from my institution to get along there. So I never actually managed it. But I'm going to put in a proposal for next year. I think it's in China next year. And I've been thinking what to propose, what kind of an abstract to write. And I came across an article in Scientific American yesterday, which gave me an idea for an article I'd like to write, or a proposal I'd like to, a paper I'd like to produce. So I thought I'd just put it past you first, see what you think. I should just say first off that this particular conference, and indeed most consciousness conferences, are a bit of a mixed bag. You know, some of the papers you get, those things are fantastic. You know, good hard science, neural correlates of consciousness, or really good philosophy papers. But occasionally, you invariably get a lot of spiritual, woolly stuff around the outside, quantum stuff around the outside, which I guess have to be included since people are talking about those things. But it is a bit loosey-goosey, if you know what I mean. And next year's conference, which I think is in China, it's the same. In fact, they've got Deepak Chopra doing some workshopy thing before the conference proper, which is I don't know about, think about that. But anyway, so this is the idea for the conference paper, which at the moment obviously is just an idea in my head, which I'll try to work up into a full abstract. But this article I came across, which was actually in the 10 most popular articles, 10 most popular blog posts, something like that, to do with in Scientific American for last year. And it was by this guy called Jesse something, I can't remember his name now. But it was to do with masturbation. And I think if I talked about masturbation, that's going to be really popular, isn't it? Let's face it. But it was to do with masturbation in animals, particularly in primates, and basically just observing that, comparing that to masturbation in human animals, particularly males. And it was citing the research that was done some years ago with college students, male college students particularly, who masturbate on average something like every 48 hours or 72 hours or something like that, very frequently, and almost invariably within 72 hours of having sexual intercourse with a female. Because you would think that, if you've got a hot date lined up, that you wouldn't want to have a wank first, but apparently many people do, and that's interesting. So there was part of it talking about that, and basically providing some kind of support for the idea that what's going on there is you're kind of cleaning out your old sperm and getting some new stuff ready. And there's a fantastic bit of research citing, referring to that, where they collected the flow back, as it's called, which is the discharged semen from a woman's vagina after she's had sex, where they collect that and then check the viability of the sperm in it. And apparently those, let me just see if I can get this right, women who've had sex with men who have indeed masturbated within the 72-hour period prior to that have a greater percentage of, oh god, I mean basically what's happening is that the female is expelling dead semen, or in non-viable sperm, and there's far more non-viable sperm in men who have not masturbated in that 72-hour period. So it's a really interesting lockstep between male and female biology going on there. If you don't have a wank, most of your sperms will be dead, and the female will chuck them out at the end anyway, so you're wasting your time. You should crack one off before you go out for that hot date. That's not really what I'm talking about though. Sorry, a bit of a deviation there. The bit of research which was next on that was to do with masturbation. Just observing that, whilst, as I say, young men particularly, but also women, masturbate very, very frequently, and humans do. Animals do it very, very rarely. Very, very rare. Well, very rarely do it to orgasm, at least. You get monkeys in zoos who are constantly playing with themselves, but they almost never do it to orgasm. And even the higher primates, the bonobos and chimps, again, you would think they would, because they have a reputation for being a bit randy, but they don't do it. In fact, even on the rare occasions they do it, is when they are actually in the presence of a female who is not willing, or in the presence of another act of copulation by a male and female ape or something like that. Then occasionally, really, really rarely, like 2 observations in a 5-year period. It's that kind of rare, really rare. Whereas, as I say, humans do it all the bloody time. So what's that about? The idea was that the thesis that was being put forward in this little article was to do with fantasy. Basically saying that, you know, because animals, and in this case apes particularly, are only capable of masturbating to orgasm when they're in the presence of actual visual stimulus. You know, there it is, there's the hot female ape with her legs open, or there's this piece of, you know, girl on girl action, or whatever it may be. You know, they can only do it when that's happening, and as I say, even then only rarely, whereas men and women of the human species do it all the time when there's nothing present at all. The thesis is that the reason for that is we can fantasize, we can imagine, and in this article there's lots and lots of really good evidence and some good anthropological and ethological studies about fantasy in humans, and it's the role that it plays in well, all kinds of sexual practices, but masturbation in this particular case. Okay, so you've got fantasy going on there. So what I'd like to do is to take that idea and just to play around with the idea, cast masturbation and the fantasy which accompanies masturbation as being one of the origins of consciousness, one of the origins of that particular human self-reflexive consciousness. You know, because if we have this little trait, this little weird little ability to be able to imagine things in vivid multimedia, to the extent where, you know, we can get a hard on and proceed with something like a sexual engagement with that fantasy, then that marks us out as very different, doesn't it? And that marks us out as being able to produce a kind of internal representation of a being, maybe even a being that we can call ourselves. Self-other relationships, we can imagine those in great detail, which other animals just don't seem to be able to do. And the fact that it's driven by sexuality, or masturbation in this case, I think just seems to add weight to it. You know, because in the same way that technology, internet technology for example, is largely driven by the porn industry, you know, we probably would not have the internet we have now if it wasn't for the fact that porn has been the driver for that. In a kind of way that parallels that, I think we would not have the consciousness that we have now if sex hadn't been the driver for it. And sexual capacity and fantasy, particularly sexual fantasy. You know, so at some point in our evolutionary history, you know, when we were some kind of hominid shambling around either in West Africa or possibly on the way across through Kazakhstan or into Western Europe, somewhere on that great journey, some ape was born with a slightly enhanced capacity to imagine things. Slightly enhanced capacity to imagine things, that's all. Just to be able to do the representation thing. They could all do it a little bit, you know, they could all imagine what would happen if they picked that fruit. They could all imagine what would happen if they stepped into that cave with a bear in it. But this one's got a better one. This one can imagine it to the point where it's able to self-stimulate and represent in itself the actions to the detail that would allow it to simulate intercourse. Now that one obviously is going to have a lot more hard-ons than any other ape around the place because it's fantasising better. It'll probably score more, it'll probably spread its seed more. Its progeny will have that trait as well, presumably, and will also be able to fantasise. And out of that fantasisation, out of that ability to represent the other and make the other do things that are interesting and stimulating, all kinds of other possibilities emerge, don't they? Yeah, I think I could probably work that up. I'll put a link to the article in the description box of this video, and as I write, if I do get around to this, I might not even bother, but if I do write this as an abstract, I'll read it out in a more formal sense to see if it makes sense. Yeah, what can we call it? I mean, I'd like to kind of refer slightly to other workings. So I'm thinking about Julian James's book, The Origins of Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind. That was quite a famous book.
you know, it turned out it was a bad thesis, but interesting, very stimulating for its time. So I want to title this a bit like that, like the origin of consciousness in the pornographic imagination. And that origin of consciousness in the pornographic imagination. Yeah, that'll do.